Ian.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see there's quite a few registrants have joined the webinar already. Ian Robertson from BrightBridge Solutions speaking, and welcome to, I think it's the fourth in the series of webinars which we're putting on to showcase our Built for NetSuite solution partners who provide complementary solutions to our NetSuite projects. I'm going to hand over now to Dave Walton of NetStock, my apologies, who's going to take us through the advanced inventory management tool, which Dave's been working with for a number of years now. Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. And I'm going to take you through about the NetStock application, which is inventory optimization in the cloud. And just by way of an introduction in terms of our customer base, so you can recognize this is a map of the world. And every country that you can see that is red means that we've got at least one customer there. And our aim, obviously, is to make this very much like Mars, red all over. So just by way of a backdrop to NetStock as a business, we'll start in this central section here, this X4. What that represents is that NetStock is the fourth time that we have built an inventory optimization solution. We'll call it solution because the three previous ones were exactly that. They were server-based. And the software was very much a vehicle around which a lot of consultancy time was sold. And as such, and if we consider the one just before NetStock, it was a product called Optimizer. The starting price for the Optimizer product was £150,000. And the biggest deal that they sold was $2 million in the US. So as you can imagine, with those sorts of price tags, it was very much large corporates was the marketplace that they were fishing in. Very long sales cycles, famine to feast. Now, they sold Optimizer back in 2010, played a little bit of golf, twiddled their thumbs for a while, and then a couple of them got together and said, are we done, or shall we go again? So they thought about that for a little while, and what they decided to do was, yes, let's go again, but let's understand the difficulties around our past. So let's build something that is cloud-based only, which is very forward-thinking, particularly back in 2010. Excuse me. Let's make it very simple to connect to multiple ERP systems. Let's make it very simple to understand and to use. Still include a lot of sophistication under the bonnet, but because we're doing all that, make it very price disruptive in the inventory optimization space. So if you think about that as a message, it very much means that, you know, because small and medium enterprises, they struggle with inventory optimization, just like the large corporates do. So we really exist as a company to help small and medium enterprises be able to get a better inventory performance. So they started programming NetStock, and we had a sellable version in 2011. Made our first sale in 2011 in South Africa, started building the business in South Africa, then attracted folks, first of all, from the other businesses in Australia, then in North America, and more recently here in Europe. And since that first one in 2011, we just gone through this morning. We added 2 more customers overnight in Australia and South Africa today, taking us to 1,451 customers globally. And if big data turns you on, we are planning on a daily basis, forecasting on a monthly basis, 88 million item location records, which is some pretty big data. We're helping our customers manage in excess of £16 billion worth of inventory, which is another startling number. And for some time now, we have more than 10,000 users logging in on a daily basis. Of course, what logging in means is on any browser, on any device, anywhere that there is an internet connection. And as a global team, yesterday we added 2 more to our global team, taking us to 51 people. And we can boast more than 300 man-years of inventory optimization experience, which means that there isn't particularly any nuance out there that we can't at least give a very considered answer to, and often a solution to in the application as well. So these are the headaches that most of our prospects bring to us. Typically, they've got too much of the wrong inventory. They've got too little of the right inventory. Now, they're trying to do forecasting of many, many items and the planning processes by downloading data from ERP platforms and then number crunching in Excel. And of course, that is not only difficult and time consuming. There's that old adage about there being 88% of all spreadsheets that has a calculation error somewhere in it that is affecting the output. So it's also quite dangerous as well. And because it's being done in Excel, often there is blanket triggers, reorder triggers set, which means for some items that's not enough, and for other items that's way too much. And all of that boils down to not having a sufficient time to do value-added tasks. Now, in trying to solve those headaches, we actually deliver 3 benefits. One, we reduce inventory, releasing working capital back into the business to spend on other things. Typically, we do that. We don't do it on every customer because some customers are not planning to have sufficient, and their service is very poor as a consequence. But typically there is a reduction, but at the same time an improvement in off-the-shelf availability. Now, obviously those two are the biggest two from a return on investment perspective, but it is often the third one that is the reason that people move forward with us, because all of that number crunching that they're doing in Excel spreadsheets, we do overnight while people are tucked up in bed asleep. Now, in providing those benefits, typically we are addressing these 2 key questions. The top one, that's the simpler one of the 2, if you like. That is, what do we need to order today and over the next 12 months to keep us at our optimal inventory levels? The second one's quite a bit more involved. That gets its arms around items where you might have too much in stock, where you may or may not have too much in stock, but you've got too much on order because maybe since you placed the order, the demand has reduced, or you've taken a large return, or the warehouse has found some inventory that they didn't know they had. None of which happens, right? Items that you should have in stock, but the opening stock is 0 or negative if there's a back order. Items where now the stocked out items, the previous one I just mentioned, those are obviously the most visible problems in most businesses. What is less visible is items where there is stock, but we can see the stock's not sufficient to manage the demand until the next delivery, potential stock out. And then underpinning all of that, and in the application, there is, we call it a tournament-based statistical forecasting engine. Tournament-based because at the beginning of every month, just after we've got another month of sales history, we calculate a forecast for every item in every warehouse location. And we apply, based on the age of the item, up to 15 different algorithms. Anything from a simple moving average up through intermittency, Box-Jenkins, exponential smoothing, right the way up to seasonality with trend. Now, those more complex seasonality ones, it's impossible to find annual seasonality if the item's only 4 months old. So that's why I said, it's based on the age of the item. So for each algorithm that's been calculated for every item in every location, we backtrack that into the past, and we then compare it to the actual sales history. And the application chooses the algorithm that gives the least absolute error when it does that backtracking, so the best fit. You can't force a particular algorithm, but I'm not sure why you'd want to force one that is it's a worse fit anyway. But you can collaborate with those forecasts at a macro level. So all of the items in a particular grouping or from a particular supplier, and you can collaborate with them at an individual item location level as well. Now, there's only one thing that you can say about a forecast though, and that is that it's going to be wrong. Now we can see some of them are likely to be more wrong than others. And we can see that because in the application, we've built a couple of areas that try and pinpoint forecasts that look like they may be suspect. One from a trend perspective, and the other one that's focused on the current month. And we will look at the current month one on the webinar today, but not the trend one. Now, just by way of how we hang together, with NetSuite. So we have a couple of bundles, one which contains a number of bespoke fields because there's some data that's required to make our product work that does not have a standard repository in NetSuite. And the other bundle is a starting suite of saved searches that then pull the information that we need on a nightly basis, but you can do an ad hoc refresh during the day from NetSuite and pumps it up to our server in the cloud, which then triggers a refresh of the NetStock application, the end of which you can then go into the application, like I'll show you soon. And also there is a suite of out-of-box reports, CSV reports, and they go back down to the server. And recommended orders, when you download them out of NetStock, they do interface with the API and they create purchase orders or work orders or transfer orders directly back into NetSuite itself. So that's the last one of the slides. You know, this being cloud-based, you can now see where I am. So we'll just stop the presentation and we'll go into NetStock itself. So lots of businesses have hundreds and thousands of items. Now, something that's very intrinsic in NetStock is what we call classification. Now, if I hover over the A class, you can see there the out-of-box setting that we use for you know, the classification here. You may have heard of this as Pareto analysis, but basically what we're doing is based on the next 12 months of forecast, sales forecast, multiplied by the inventory cost price. The A items are those that make up 80% of that, B items the next 16, C items the remaining 4. Now you can drive it based on sales history, or you can drive it based on average selling price or margin, and you can vary those percentages if that makes sense in your world. But in this particular location, I can see that we have 337 A-class items, or 7% of the total. I can see the stock value and percentage on those items as well, and some demand information, and even days and turns of inventory on them. And everywhere you see something that is red and underlined in NetStock means you can drill in. So I can drill in and get a listing of those 337 items. This is quite a generic listing. You can get to this listing from a lot of places within NetStock, and there are other versions of listings as well. They all behave similarly in as much that you can sort on any element of any column. You can apply filters. And we can see it's pre-filtered on the A class because that's where we came into this listing from. But these are product groupings, and you can have as many product groupings as you like. I have a customer with 13 to slice and dice their product range. You can filter if you're a manufacturer or you use kitting, bills and materials. You can filter on items that are in a bill or not in a bill, top level finished goods, raw materials, sub-assemblies, those kind of things. You can filter on items from a given supplier. These filters almost make it like a report writer for the data that is in NetStock. So just picking a few at random, I could filter on If I was interested in my new product introductions, I could filter on items between, I don't know, 1 and 4 months old, for example. Now, we talked earlier about being able to collaborate with the forecast. Now, you can filter on items that have had a manual amendment to the statistical forecast, should you wish to. There's the ability to add a comment that follows the item around NetStock, and you can filter on items with comments or without comments. Just picking a few out there. I won't apply the filter because I always end up with a combination of no items, so we'll just clear that down. So we're still in the A-class items here. These are item codes, and this top one does have a comment, so we can see here, we always show the comment history from wherever it was, so the box would get bigger and bigger depending on the commentary. You could drill into each item in turn and use the listing as like a to-do list, depending on what you're wanting to do. You can navigate between the pages of the listing, and you can pump it out to a CSV and import it into Excel and combine with other data, should you wish to. But that is listings, and specifically looking at the A-class items, and then obviously the B-class, the number starts ramping up, and then the C-class items are your tail. Now then there's another couple of classifications. So what a non-stocked item is an item where we only recommend an order, a replenishment order, when the firm demand in the lead time is greater than stock plus on order. So it's a make to order, purchase to order flag, if you like. And there's ways of driving that from within NetSuite. And then finally, there's an obsolete classification. We don't recommend an order for an obsolete item full stop, but it's useful having some obsolete items in, particularly if they're part of a supersession chain. So an old item has been replaced by a shiny new item where we're expecting it to sell in the same way. Because with that relationship, we can do a couple of things in NetStock. We can forecast the item, the new item, based on the sales history of the old item. We can also factor in any remaining stock, open replenishment orders, etc. on the old item as an input to the recommended order calculation on the new item to help that ramp down, ramp up of inventory as we're transitioning, conundrum that we all struggle with. So that, and you may have seen this before, but this is the common approach to item classification. Now, what you can have is you can have very important high running items that, because they're so cheap in the range, they become a B or a C class as a consequence. So to mitigate against that a little bit, we do the same analysis again, but this time just based on units. So now there's no fiscal input at all to this classification to give us high, medium, and low runners. And the items in the non-stocked and obsolete sections are the same in both sets of analysis. Having done both sets of analysis, we put them together in this two-dimensional matrix where we plot ABC down the left and low, medium, and high across the top. So these 138 items, the A highs, they're pretty important items to the business, right? We color that classification green. We also consider the items in these two classifications as those that make up the bread and butter items of the business. And then these down here, these are your tail, and maybe candidates for making non-stocked, you know, particularly based on how well you sweat the inventory on them. Now, you may be wondering why this is so intrinsic. We do this classification for two reasons, really. One's for importance. So, for example, there, if you came in the morning and you had a stock out on an A high item and a stock out on a C low item, I expect you're thinking that you would tackle the A high one first because that one's driving much more importance, more revenue, etc. into the business. But the second reason in my mind is more important. And that's because this is the starting point for applying the policy parameters, of which there are two, that feed into the min-max level calculations for the items. So the two policy parameters, the first one is the desired service level, expressed as a target fill rate. And obviously, the higher you have that set towards 100%, the more safety stock that we calculate to buffer that specific item's supply and demand risk. The second one is the replenishment cycle, or the frequency with which you replenish it. So just thinking about these ones down here. So they're very high running, but they're still a C, so they must be really cheap, relatively. Okay, so why not, when you're triggered to reorder them, reorder three months worth and take advantage of a reduced number of purchase order lines, receipts, three-way matching activity, and generally have a higher buffer to service because there's less times a year that you're driving back down to safety stock. Whereas on these items, they're very low running, but they're still an A, so they must be extremely expensive. You would be mad to set the same replenishment cycle for those ones. Now, what this is essentially doing for you is establishing your inventory strategy. What is the level of service that you want to provide to your customers? And with this information, we can then tell you what the model stock is. So this is the stock on average that you should have based on lead times, those policy parameters, and those forecasts going into the future. And it would be interesting to see in your world what your actual stock is versus your model stock, because obviously the difference between the two is the opportunity. So that is the section on classification. And as I said, it's very intrinsic and very important part of NetStock, because having established the model stock, everything that we do in recommending orders is driving you to that model stock. And this dashboard is capturing items that are deviant to that model stock. So the things that need attention. So that's classification. I'm just going to take a breath now and a swig of tea. My voice was getting a bit rough, so sorry about that. So let's have I think a little bit more about the dashboard. So the dashboard is a combination of these key performance indicators, these bar charts across the top, and focused to-do lists in each section. You can't change the number of time buckets that we show when we do benchmark, where we first go live as a line in the sand. However, you can change the amount of time that we show in that number of time buckets if you want to get down to a lower level of granularity. Now, the top three part of the dashboard is all around your inventory investment. So the first one we've talked about, this is the model stock here, and this is your actual stock. Now, one of the reasons that you might have more stock than your model is starting to introduce the second one of those two forecast challenges that we've built, and it's very much focused around the current month. So what we do is we go through the month, we're taking the sales current month to date, prorating it for a full month, comparing it to this month's sales forecast, taking the difference between those two numbers and multiplying it by the inventory cost to kind of scale the problem. But these are my top 5 worst offenders where, based on run rate, I'm not selling what I thought I should for some reason. And it's, we don't know what the reason is. It's a prompt for you guys to contemplate what that reason is. And you might have a trot along to the sales office and they say, oh, sorry, we've lost a customer. Apologies for not telling you. And that's because they only tell you when they win new business, right? It's the nature of the beast. But at least your tool is now prompting you to that situation. And now you know the situation, you can respond and you can talk about what the ongoing forecast needs to be amended to with that customer's demand disappeared, okay, until the statistics can catch back up. All of our to-do lists, we show the top 5 worst offenders, but you can get a full listing of all of the items in each category. The next section, so we talked about, and I'll show you how we do that in a bit more detail, calculating min-max levels. These items, the opening stock is all greater than that max to the tune of this value. Okay, And we can see the total problem, and we can see the contribution the top 5 has on that total problem. What you can do is, having put all of the mitigating actions in place on this top one, what I can do is mute it from the dashboard for the product's lead time later. So if I refresh the screen now, this top one would disappear, and what was number 6 would float onto the bottom, or come onto the bottom. You can't float onto the bottom. Sorry about that. But I won't mute it, because I'll end up with no demo items. But it's not like you're hiding the problem under the carpet, because if you go into a full listing, then that top item would still be on the list, but that box there indicating that it's muted would be ticked. Okay, it's just a way of enabling you to work down a descending list of priority problems. These items here, they may be in excess or may not be in excess, but we've got open replenishment orders that's going to take us into or further into excess to the tune of this value. Okay, we can see the total problem, and we can see, well, the top 5 is actually 2.5 million of the 3.5 in total. Now, what this section is doing for you is it's driving you, getting with your supplier or internal manufacturing to see if you can cancel, delay, or reduce. And this top one, this may have been on this list yesterday, so you were prompted to a reduction in demand, you reduce the demand, and now we can see we've got too much on order. So very, very quickly, you're alerted to now the consequence of dealing with the first problem. The next section is all around service. So we talked about setting target fill rates, and we can see what that is aggregated up. And we measure the fill rate as well. And one of the reasons the fill rate might be below target is the opposite of this. These items, based on run rate, are selling more strongly than the forecast suggests. And we may only be on the 10th of the month and already sold 125% of our month's forecast. So what's driving that extra demand? Is it going to continue? Do I need to increase my forecast until the statistics can catch back up? These items should all be in stock, but the opening stock is 0 or negative if there's a back order. To scale this problem, what we do is we say, what is the amount of demand between today and the earlier of the next delivery or the lead time? We take that amount of demand, we multiply it by the inventory cost to give us a projected loss of cost of sales. And we can see here there's 302 items stocked out, total potential loss of cost of sales of 843. Well, if we've only got time to address 5 today, let's address the 5 that's dealing with 60% of my problem. But I can get the full listing. These items, these are in stock, but we can see the stock is not sufficient to manage the forecasted demand until the next delivery, with the same calculation to scale the problem. So what these two are doing here for you is identifying items that you need to try and expedite supply on. And if you're able to do that on these items such that your customer doesn't feel a thing, well, isn't that a great benefit? The last section on the dashboard, there's not a common theme to. This section here, this is also part of your forecasting business process. We think these items are new, and that's because there's either inventory and or open replenishment orders to the tune of this value, but the forecasts are all 0, prompting you to actually go into the application and add a forecast if it's a new product introduction, or if it's in the case of a super session, add that relationship, after which the forecast will be calculated based on the sales history of the old item. And once the forecast is in, they will be appraised in the normal way. The next section is a summary of the different statuses. And you'll see the top one there is OK. You won't find a single OK item on our dashboard because you don't need to worry about them. They're just sat nicely between the min-max levels. Data purity, the last part of our dashboard, is really a dashboard in its own right. So if I go into the full report on this, we get to see about 50 challenges from the data that we pull from NetSuite. Okay, so for example, if we had items with no lead time set, we would see that here. We can see that there's 121 item location records where there's no default supplier assigned. And I can even go in and get a listing of those and pump them out to a spreadsheet, and then use that spreadsheet to gather my missing master data to populate back into NetSuite. So this is just sort of looking after that trash in, trash out from a master data perspective. Very useful during the onboarding stage, but is always available as we add new items into the range over time. And some of it not only just means it's no trash in, trash out into NetStock, but some of it looks after NetSuite itself. Like, for example, we show items where the selling price is less than or equal to the cost price, which, items you should be really trying to promote, right? So that's our dashboard, and hopefully that visibility of what the planner buyers should be doing on a daily basis to improve their stock position impresses you, and you can see that it's very easy to look at and easy to read, and quite I'm trying to think of the word there, but it's just escaped me for the moment. It's easy to use anyway. So that's our dashboard, and includes what needs to be actioned today in terms of addressing. So let's have a look now at a particular item code. So this is an item code in this particular location. In a multi-location supply chain, we could see where else it lives and some information about the demand of that item in other locations, and the status, etc., of the item in other locations. And we could even navigate to this item in that location directly from there. But we'll stay in the central store and have a look at what other information we have here. So this is some static information that we're pulling out of NetSuite in terms of how the inventory is costed, the average selling price, volume is useful, the weight, the stock on hand, its value. This is the model level that we've calculated for this particular item, its classification, the default supplier, the purchase price, and any item groupings. And then if I hover over this demand tile up here, I get to see in that pop-up on the top row the last 12 months of sales in stocking units of measure, and the next forecasted sales, which might be statistical or it might have been amended, for the next 12 months also in stocking units of measure. Now, the distribution forecast might not be appropriate to all of you. This is what needs to be replenished from this central store to those other locations to satisfy the sales there. So we can plan the interrelationships and replenishment of one location to another in that distribution forecast. Just very quickly, in the central warehouse tab, we then see a monthly summary of what needs to be shipped from this central store to each of those locations, summarized by month, but the actual detail is in the background, okay, as a separate demand stream on top of the sales that are made out of this central store. Other information we can see here, we can see some 12-month averages. This is a nice graphic. So in this database, we're 90% through the current month, but we've only realized 66% of our forecasted quantity. The item's 27 months old, and the forecast that has been chosen, the method that is best fit, is no trend with seasonality. And we can see here by this snowflake that at least 1 month has been amended. How that's done is down on the forecast tab, where now we see all of the sales history in stocking units and measure. We can see the next 12 months of forecast. The snowflake now tells us specifically which months have been amended, and we can see all that information graphically as well. relatively recent addition is this number of days that we're out of stock. So we can see here we were out of stock a number of days on these 2 months, which may have been the explanation for low sales. It might not, depends on your go-to-market strategy, etc., etc. But this is the ongoing forecast. Now, to amend it, we click here. We always keep the statistical forecast as a control, and you can see the months that have been amended to different numbers, and there are 2 lines on the graph there indicating those 2 numbers. We can return to the statistical forecast and those 2 lines converge. We can overtype just in here a specific quantity for a given month. I think we're going to sell 4,000. Or you can paint a number of months in where you can add the same quantity to each month, subtract it, make them all equal to, or if you know that something is happening during that period that's going to add, let's say, I don't know, 20% more demand, you can use that slider to do that very efficiently for all of those months. So now I'm happy, I've made that amendment to the forecast. If I apply it, then those forecasts have been updated. The next section here, this is really inventory optimization, where it all comes together now. So we talked about setting a target fill rate, and we can see this one is set to 98%. Just so you know, the relationship between the number of days of safety stock that you need and the target fill rate is a non-linear relationship. It really hockey sticks up as you get nearer and nearer to 100%. The lead time for this product, pulled out of NetSuite, is 30 days. Now there is a textbook formula to derive the number of days of safety stock that you need to deliver this fill rate in this lead time. But we take it a stage further. We analyze how well the supplier delivers this particular product to you in terms of time and quantity. So let's say on average, we took delivery of this item in 40 days, not 30, but they always over-delivered by 10%, bless them, probably guilt. But we would take a blend of those 2 measurements and probably add another 8 or 9 days of safety stock into the mix to buffer that supply risk. We also look at the demand volatility, the forecast accuracy, and the bias, and we may add or subtract some days of safety stock based on that analysis as well. And all of that boils down to the need for 19 days of safety stock on this particular item. And we replenish it weekly. Okay, now you can take control of all of these settings within NetStock itself. Okay, so our IP is the starting position, and you can take control should you need to. Now, you'll notice that these 3 elements are all in time, but we don't order time, we order quantities. The way we turn them into a quantity is up here. So we look first of all at the lead time. So what is the demand in my lead time of 30 days? That demand will be some sales forecast that we've not consumed yet. It may well be some firm sales orders that we're pulling out of NetSuite, okay, with forecast consumption. In this case, it might be the need to replenish other locations as a separate demand stream, but the total demand in the lead time on this item is 13,969. We then look at the safety stock days, days 31 through 49 in this case, and there's a further 9,074 demand in that period of time. Your lead time and safety stock added together is your classic reorder point. We then look at the replenishment cycle, what's a week's worth of demand from day 50 through 56. And there's a further 3,843 in that period. We add that to the reorder point to give us our order up to quantity, our max. So that is the min, reorder point, and max. Now, when I change the forecast, if I changed it in the first 30 days plus 19 plus 7 days, this total period here, these numbers would have dynamically recalculated. Okay. We know the stock on hand. We subtract any past due sales orders, and that's because this is all forward looking. That gives us an available stock. We pull out your open replenishment orders, whether they be purchase orders, work orders, or transfers, depending on the item in a location's supply method. Okay, we add that to the available stock to give us a net stock position. And if the net stock is less than the reorder point, there is a recommended order factoring in any item MOQs, any item multiples that we pull from NetSuite to give us a recommended order. We apply standard rounding to the multiple. You can see here the ideal quantity is 7,075. Which is only 75 of the next multiple of 500. So we've actually rounded that down to 7,000. So that is what we need to order today. Okay, now I can see that over time as well. So if I go into the projection graph, that gray band across the bottom there, that's this item's variable min-max quantity over time. Variable because the demand is variable. Or to think about it more powerfully, we automatically ramp up your inventory ahead of high periods of demand and back down again in low periods of demand. And those red bars there, and I can see them in this table, that is what I need to either make, purchase, or ship from one location to another, depending on the item's supply method. Okay. Now, for those manufacturers amongst you, this item happens to be a manufactured item. And here's its bill of materials right here. I can hover over a component. I get a little summary of the component's position in whichever location it's pulled from. If I hover over the link, I get to see the quantity per. I can navigate to a component where I get to see that it's a component in all of these finished goods. And if I click on the table, I now get to see a monthly summary, but the detail is in the background, of the demand on this component pegged to each finished good, which is some amazing visibility. Okay, now if I look at this component's demand, if we sold the component as well, there would be some sales history and therefore some forecast. If we move the component from one location to another, there would be some distribution forecast. But in this case, the only demand stream on this particular item is bill of material demand. It's a true component only. And it has its own settings, and we calculate them in max levels, and then we can see what we need to buy on this particular component and when in order to make all of those finished goods plans. Okay, so just popping back now to the slide deck where we talked about these two key questions. So what we looked at on the dashboard was what needs attention today. And what we've just gone through is what do we need to order today and over the next 12 months. How we then transact that is in the order schedule. So if I click on the order schedule, then if I go to one of those downstream locations and click on there and change this to warehouses, this is what I need to transfer. So there's 32 items, total quantity of 7467 and value from the central store to this particular location. And I could create the order and send that to the NetSuite API. But we'll focus on suppliers and go back into the central store. So this top one here, you can see production line 1. So this is what I need to make today. So we create like a virtual vendor, and it can be more than one. It could be one per machine if you wanted, but this is what we need to manufacture today. And then the rest of them on here is what I need to purchase today. Okay, this look forward days, that's quite useful. It's used for things like supplier shutdowns. So if you're buying from China, every year you have to go through a process of trying to pull product forward because there's a period of time that the Chinese prefer to prance around in colorful dragon outfits and light firecrackers rather than working. Okay, and so what you can do is, so let's say we're running up to Chinese New Year and we want to pull forward, I don't know, an extra 30 days worth of those red bars, those recommended orders. So if I click out of that now, the 11 items and 7,000 units in total goes to 13 items and 7,968 units. So this is a very cool way of ordering product early in the case of a supplier shutdown, but we'll stay on what needs to be ordered today and click on the vendor in the right place this time and create order, where we get to see a lot of information for the 11 items that I need to order today. You get another chance to see the demand that's flowing into those min-max levels, and this one attracts my attention here. It's very low compared to the previous history. I might have another go around with sales, and we might agree that yes, maybe it is a bit too low, and we can go into the item, we can amend the forecast in the way we looked at before and apply it. And because that is dynamically recalculated, note that we now need, I don't know, 450 or whatever the new calculation was. You get a chance to see the item in other locations. So let's say you're buying centrally and you distribute to other locations, and you can see that some of the downstream locations has some excess inventory. So you might choose to reposition that excess and reduce what you're buying or making fresh into the beginning of your supply chain. You get to see the ideal quantity and the influence an MOQ has on it. And what some people do is they use MOQs as like optimal price breaks. So if that were the case, then knowing that, we might choose to pay a little bit more per each, but less in total, just for example. Now, you can even sort this on descending value and really interrogate the high value ones, knowing that your safety stock is buffering that supply and demand risk. Okay. We keep a little tally of the recommended order, what it's been amended to, and the difference. And as I said, these are the 11 items that we need to order today. It doesn't include what we need to order tomorrow or the next day, but we can get to those as well. So if I click on Add and select Top-Up Items, these are items from the same vendor where today we're above the reorder point but below the max. And the top-up quantity takes us back up to the max. Okay, again, the top-up quantity has MOQs and multiples applied to it. All right, but you can simply add those top-up items, which essentially is just realigning all the red bars to the same interval from your supplier. Or you can use this engine down here to right-size the order. So let's say this is a Chinese supplier and I'm trying to fill a container, and I know that a container takes, I don't know, 950 cubic meters, which I know is more like a ship, but it's just because the data is large. And if I click on Solve now, it selects a combination of top-up items that takes me as close to, but not exceed my target. So in this scenario, I'm happy that I'm shipping less air. So I'm going to add those 3 items to my order, and now it's a 14-line order. And I click on Download, and then a CSV file of this order is presented to the NetSuite API. And it goes in and creates a purchase order or work order or transfer order, depending on the transaction type, fully back into NetSuite. So that kind of completes a top level look at the process and answering those 2 key questions. What do I need to order today and what needs attention today? And of course then the planner buyers completed their work, and we have another go round, another refresh overnight, and anything that's changed in the supply chain will be alerted to them, and completes really the sort of webinar. Now, the intention of this webinar is to obviously get your interest in this functionality, and with that interest, reach out to us to arrange a one-on-one deeper dive demo. A lot of the same information, but some extra as well. but that's the intention of the webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll just hand over to Ian now to kind of summarize and close us down.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. That was an excellent insight into how NetStock can help our NetSuite customers optimize their inventory levels and, of course, reap the financial benefits thereof. Dave's given you the call to action for a one-to-one deep dive. Please contact me if you'd like that, ian.robertson@brightbridgesolutions.com, and I'll help organise that. Alternatively, this webinar will be published on our website, and everybody attending will be sent a link to that to view, and please share it with your colleagues back at base. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ian. Bye.
Cheers, Dave.